You can watch it. You can watch it. Yeah. Don't worry. Why am I not hearing anything?
Because I'm not saying anything yet. If you can mute yourself, guys, if you would, please. Good evening, everybody. Mark Burke speaking. Haven't spoken to you for a couple of months. Myself and Malcolm are here this evening to talk about monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning. Well, at least Malcolm is, anyway. But before we start the webinar proper, we're just going to catch up with some news for everybody. A few quick subjects that we're going to run through this evening. At the beginning of the knowledge check on tonight's webinar, there are a couple of questions there from Jack Bailey. Jack and Natasha are about to update the AID memoir, and there's been some discussions around putting all of the product info, so all the information around our kit, so from the kit list, from the AID memoir, from the ops manual, putting all that into one place. So what they actually want to do is to actually throw that out to the response team members as to where that might be best kept. So the first two questions, other than your name and email address on tonight's knowledge check, is a couple of questions out to you guys to give us your preference or say where you would find that information. So please have a look at that. Secondly, the response team training manual. It's something that we've spoken about for a number of years. We've had one or two different iterations in the past, but what we've put together now, and so the new cohort of response team members, response team trainees, those individuals that will be starting with us in October, have just started a 3-month program of pre-learning. That pre-learning is in the form of a training manual. Now, we're actually going to throw this out to all our SRTs as well to actually have a look at. Please make some comments, come back to us at training, any comments you have. Have a go yourself. There's lots of interactive videos, training from other organisations, from the Red Cross, from Disaster Ready. Our new ops starters have also undertaken that. So they started back in July. Myself and the rest of the training team and other individuals, Malcolm, Alice, other people have been having an input on that training as well. So they're 2 weeks at end of 2 weeks of 4 weeks of training. They're also working through that exact same manual. So please have a look. The link is there. It's on the portal. The portal will take you to a link to a Word document where you can, through Dropbox, work your way through the manual. And within the manual itself, there's links to the various training courses and videos that we would like to have a look at. Please have a look at that. Thirdly, on the list tonight for news is just to say to everybody that we have some new staff members in the operations team. They're across the board. So we have 3 new ops cohorts in the form of Beth Simons, Joe Arpanen, and Anna Dixie. So 3 new members there have just joined us. Malcolm is expanding his team, so we're concentrating on monitoring and evaluation. So there's been some investment in Malcolm's team. 3 new people there, Martin Strutton, Karen Green, and Amy Crisp. And also one other new starter in the form of an operations Rotary liaison individual. That person will be working with Rotary around the globe to look at how we can partner best with those as we move forward. And that individual who picked up that role is Tim Hedges. So there's 3 individuals there that some of you will hopefully have recognised before: Martin Strutton, Joe Arpanen, and Tim Hedges, who are all or were all existing response team members. So congratulations to them. What we intend to do as well is get some photos of those starters, plus the ones that started back in January, and actually so you can put a face to a name when they give you the call or look to your help going forward. That's kind of all from me. The final piece on there is a request from the forum members. The spokesperson tonight will be Yves Saint Laurent. Oh no, sorry, that's Yishan Li. So I'm going to attempt to pick up the PowerPoint that she's going to use, and then she's got 5 minutes, or she gets dragged off the stage if she goes beyond that. So let's see if we can get that PowerPoint up for her. There we go. There it is.
Great.
So,
Hold on.
do you want to try and present that, Yishan, or?
No, it's fine. I'll just tell you when to advance the slides. They're pretty simple and they're kind of self-explanatory. So,
right.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, guys. Hi. Nice to see you all. 21 people online. That makes me really happy. Do you all have your conference call bingo sheets? No. Okay. All right. Anyways, so I've told Mark I'll limit myself to 5 minutes, so I will try to be as brief as possible. Essentially, you guys may not have heard from us from a little while, so we just want to give you guys an update on what we're doing and refresh you on what the purpose of the Response Team Forum is, so that we're all crystal clear. In our peregrinations around the SRT world, we've noticed that some people may not actually understand what we do. So we thought we would just start with this, and then we can kind of rejigger later on if you guys have any more questions on what we do, okay? So Mark, do you want to go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so the big question, of course, who are we? The Response Team Forum really came out of a desire for response team members to have some kind of way to address concerns that they didn't necessarily want to air in a public forum or even to bring to ops. And over time, that's evolved so that we've really become a sounding board, both from the operations end and from the response team body end, so that we can make sure we are addressing concerns that that either response team members or operations has, or questions that operations has about the makeup of our team and sort of what ops can do to make that relationship better and to make our operations in the field run really, really well. Of course, we also serve as your sometimes confidant. If there is something that you'd like to address that doesn't necessarily feel you need, that you don't necessarily feel needs to be aired in a public forum, you can certainly talk to any response team member who's on the forum, and we'll try to advance that to the best of our capabilities. And of course, our overarching capability is in serving as your liaison to Ops and HQ. So we're trying really hard to ensure that we're doing that job, and if we're not, we certainly want to hear about that. So be sure and let us know. On a more micro level, we are 19 members now, 19 response team members. We all do have to be active response team members. That is, we all have to have watched every single webinar and have done every single knowledge check, and hopefully have deployed recently. We represent 7 countries across the response team body, so that's who we are. Okay, if you go to the next slide, Mark. Thank you. Okay, so some things that we've done in the last couple of years, and just some things that you may not know about. We are the group that helped to produce better webinars. That is to say, we worked with operations team to ensure that the webinars were delivering what it is you needed. You may remember a survey that went around a couple of years ago based around what it is that you would be interested in seeing and how the webinars could be made to be more digestible. So we were involved in that. We were also deeply involved in the pilot of the mentorship program. Andre Blumink was the chairman for that, and he and his team put together an incredibly detailed survey and some results based on your feedback. So that's the type of thing that we will undertake. And of course, we're consistently trying to improve communications between ops and the response team, and that takes the form of monthly chats between Nikki Richardson and Derek Locke and whoever is on the hook for that sort of thing. So we're constantly trying to make sure that we're doing what we need to do. And Mark, if you go to the next slide, I'll just tell them a little bit about what's on deck. We're now working on some committees that involve IT in the field. We're also trying to work with the communications team there at HQ to make sure that we're getting them what we need, and also that they're giving us the tools that we need in the field to produce better communications. And we're also working on some core competencies for SRT members. That is, what do we need to be the best response team members in the field? This is just a sampling of a group of subcommittees that we have going on within the response team forum. So in that case, we're working really hard to ensure that that we do address these concerns that we've heard from you. And some of the things that we are continuously working on now, of course, also include things like the type of clothing we wear in the field, and you know, doing some research around that to make sure that we're answering your concerns. Okay, you can go to the next slide, Mark. Thank you. Okay, so you may have also noticed most recently that there have been some calls on the response team Facebook page for some cooperation from you guys. We'd love to see non-forum team members on our subcommittees, and the reasons for that I think are really quite explanatory. We always need fresh voices. As much as we try to have some kind of communication outside of the forum, obviously, because we like you all, obviously, and we are a response team family. We do want to make sure that we're not developing some kind of tunnel vision. So fresh voices are always really, really useful. We now do have an edict within the subcommittee structure where we are required to seek out non-forum members to participate on our subcommittees. So do know that that type of participation is incredibly, incredibly valued, and it's also something that we see as being integral to the capability of the forum to be able to produce results that actually make sense. And of course, we always like to see better geographic distribution and, frankly, more opinions make, of course, for better informed decisions, which is what we're all striving for at the end of the day. Okay, Mark, did I make it?
You did indeed. Thanks for that. Very good. I'll now attempt to get back to our original presentation for this evening. Thank you for that, Yushen. Everybody, I hope you've picked up on that and you understand the reasons and the value of the forum in what we do. So excellent work. Thank you. That's one view that we've got it. We'll try and get another one. This is what we've been having problems with earlier. Please bear with me. We're not getting any luck. So, seems to be a glitch on changing this over, but we'll get there.
That's it, Mark.
Okay, thank you. We've got there in the end. So I am now going to hand over to Mr. Malcolm Sheed, who's going to take you through the rest of the evening and hopefully not keep us too long. Okay, Malcolm, over to you.
Thank you. I feel this weight of responsibility now based on the fact that one of the forum's achievements was better webinars. So I shall attempt to do that. If I remember rightly, actually, the secret to better webinars was that I should introduce myself. So my name's Malcolm. Hello. It was also that people wanted to see faces. So I'll share my webcam. Hello. There we go. And that it should be interactive. So I'll ask a question at some point throughout this. There we go. Yeah, so the objectives today, I feel like we've been on a journey actually over the last kind of couple of years, because I've done a few webinars over the time, and I think these all sort of build on each other, starting with, if I remember rightly, the needs assessment webinar. Then there was one on monitoring in emergencies. There was also one on impact over output, I think it was. And then one on the theory of change. And I like to think that this is sort of a synthesis of all those things. It's essentially some work I've been doing kind of in the background, trying to formalize a little bit our monitoring and evaluation framework. And this is essentially where we're at with it. And the idea really is that just you understand the different phases of our M&E framework, and I guess more specifically, understand the responsibilities and roles of the deployed teams in that. I'm going to try and whistle through it very quickly because hopefully most of the subject matter within it should actually be covered in prior webinars. So if there's anything that doesn't necessarily make sense, I would revert you to previous webinars. But there will be an opportunity for some questions at the end. So the quicker I do it, the more questions we can have, or the earlier we leave, one or the other. Is it a clickety click? There we go. Okay, so this essentially is the Shelterbox meal framework. It's a diagram that won't look too different from one you've seen before. I essentially took one of Ali's and just slightly bastardized it. But it's effectively it's a 7-phase process. And what I want to do today is just talk about each of those phases very briefly. So we're going to start with the actually, before I go into the 7 phases, the whole thing is kind of wrapped up in the theory of change. So this here is the theory of change. There is a webinar on it. So if it's something that you're not familiar with or want to refresh yourself on it, yeah, I'd urge you to do so. But we've had the theory of change for a year now. And one of the things we're going to be doing over the next month is just reviewing it slightly, just to see how appropriate it is for operations. And also as a communication piece. I think one of the things that's come out of it is that actually it's quite useful to talk for talking to donors, but perhaps the layout of it, or perhaps some of the terminology is a little bit complicated. Or bamboozling. So we're going to be reviewing that. But the theory of change is essentially something that underpins this whole framework, and hopefully that will come through as I keep talking. So then we're going to move to the the first phase of the meal framework, which is phase number 1, needs assessments. Now, as I said, I would, if this is something you're unsure about, or perhaps you've been involved in, oh, okay. Someone doesn't want to see my face. Can't please everyone, can you? How do I turn that off? There we go. Okay, hopefully you can see the slides and not me. Someone else will be complaining in a minute that they want to see me, I hope. Okay, so I would revert you to the needs assessment webinar if it's something that you want to brush up on. But essentially the needs assessment is the first stage of any monitoring and evaluation process, because what we're doing is we're measuring the need for, in the case of Shelterbox, emergency shelter and non-food items. We're also looking at other relevant needs that might be appropriate to the work of Shelterbox, such as protection, for example, or water and sanitation. And then, of course, the other important part is that we look inwardly and we look at what our available resources are if we're to meet that need. So it's not just about perhaps what material resources we've got that are available or financial resources, but it's also what human resources we have that are available. And the point of doing a needs assessment is it informs our decision making, and essentially it identifies the nature of the response and defines the deployment outcomes. So in terms of monitoring and evaluation, by defining the deployment outcomes, what we're doing is we're stating what we think a success looks like, and therefore I, as someone that's normally involved in the evaluation, have something to measure against. And the needs assessment is a bit of a catch-all for everything else that you're doing. So it's not just about saying how many people are there that need emergency shelter. It's all about looking at those other related needs. So what are the logistics needs? What are the safety and security situation that we're going to be working in, and how will that affect what we're doing? Yeah, so it's a bit of a catch-all for everything that we're involved in. You might recall from the needs assessment webinar that I broke the needs assessment into three phases. And this really just sort of shows the different elements of the needs assessment. So just as a very quick overview, I talked in that about the scenario definition, which I think is something that really goes on back here in the ops room. It's when we start hearing reports of an earthquake, or perhaps we start recognizing that a storm is making landfall, or whatever it might be, the team immediately then start trying to work out what is going on. It's looking at the scale and magnitude of the problem, working out who else might be operating there, what the government are doing. And in simple terms, I always think that they're trying to answer one simple question, which is, should we deploy a team? And of course, there's lots of ancillary information that goes around that, such as, well, if we're going to deploy a team, who are we deploying? Where are we going to deploy them to? When are we going to deploy them? How? Why? Blah, blah, blah. But yeah, that's the scenario definition. Then once we've got a team in country, that first team really are engaged in the rapid needs assessment. They're starting to add a bit more detail to what we currently know. And simplifying it a little bit, I think they're basically answering one question, which is, should we request aid? And then, of course, if they are going to request aid, it's not good enough just to say, yes, we'll have 1,000 shelter kits. We need to know a little bit about that, such as what do we intend on doing with that? How might we be looking to distribute it? What do we think will be required from the organisation in order to do that? What are our logistics setups? And then finally, the final phase, which I always think is the bit that links any aid that might be in country with the beneficiary, is the in-depth needs assessment. It's very much that community level assessment. And I think the question that's being asked here is, who gets the aid? And of course, it's not as simple just say who gets it. You've also got to think about, well, how are we going to get it to them? What's the distribution methodology going to be? What additional concerns do we need to take care of in terms of perhaps protection or water and sanitation? But that essentially is the needs assessment. As I said, if there's anything that you want to review, don't hesitate to go back and look at that needs assessment webinar. Moving swiftly on, as I said, this is a whistle-stop tour. Once we've assessed for need, we then should move sort of fairly seamlessly really into the monitoring phase. And I think this is the bit that is most pertinent to the operational unit, which is obviously you and the ops team here. And I've broken it down into two parts. The first part is an early monitoring approaches, which is about monitoring your inputs, your activities, and your outputs. So it's the things that really go on before distribution. And then the next part of it is the post-distribution monitoring. So without further ado, I think if you've just been deployed, you don't want to be bogged down with complex processes, and it's not about ticking unnecessary boxes, but you as a project manager, which you are if you're deployed, need to have the tools at your fingertips that allow you to make sure that the deployment or the project is moving in the way that you'd intended. So you would monitor the inputs, you'd monitor what's going into the deployment, which is essentially material items, and also the people, the human resources you've got at your fingertips. You would monitor your activities, so you, I would hope, would make a plan of what you're going to do, and then you need to make sure that those things are being done in the way that you'd intended. And then finally, once you actually start delivering stuff, so distributing tents, you then want to monitor that to make sure that that is achieving what you wanted to achieve. We have some fairly simple but usable monitoring tools at Shelterbox. So I've said usable tools, and then the first one I'm going into is the distribution tracker. So I think there's probably people that would argue that, but we have a distribution tracker, and this is something that's been going for about a year now. It's been adapted slightly, and there are plans to keep reviewing that and simplifying it, because it is incredibly hard to have a generic distribution tracker that works across deployments. But the point of the distribution tracker is you're monitoring your inputs, you're monitoring the movement of aid from dispatch through to distribution. So you constantly should be knowing what aid you've got and where. Another important monitoring tool is beneficiary data. Beneficiary data is something that's very close to my heart, and I think one of the primary uses of beneficiary data is confirming that aid has been distributed, especially if you're working through partners, in-country partners, and you're giving them an amount of aid. You know nothing about whether that's been distributed really in a lot of situations unless you have that confirmation in the form of distribution data. And then that should be used to update your distribution tracker. The SITREP is a really important monitoring tool. It allows you to monitor your inputs, and really what I'm referring to there is the movement of people. There's a section on it that asks you for movements, and that allows you to keep a track of where people are. But it also is a really good tool for monitoring your activities. So there's a section on it that talks about planned activities. And what I'm noticing these days is actually people aren't just putting what they're doing tomorrow, they're putting what they're planning to do over the next few days. And then that can be used then when you're doing the next sit rep to say, did you achieve what you'd wanted to achieve in terms of activities? And I think the sit rep is a template that can be adapted for your needs, but I really would urge you to use it as a planning tool to outline what activities you've got, what training sessions are you running, where, what assessments are you doing, and then if something was to happen to you, someone else who's coming in would know exactly what you'd got planned. Of course, there's also the safety and security section in it, which is important to keep monitoring your safety and security. The daily debrief is another really important monitoring tool. It allows you, again, to monitor your activities. Are you as a team doing what you said you were going to do? SRTs now are really encouraged to do a morning debrief or a morning brief, sorry. What are you planning to do that day? And then sit down at the end of the day and say, did we do what we said we'd do? I've put here, it's also about monitoring outputs and outcomes. So when we talk about post-distribution monitoring in a second, I think you as a team should be discussing what you're seeing. If you're going out to distribution sites afterwards, you're not the only one looking at it. There's 2 or 4 of you there. Discuss what you've seen and try and make sense of what you've seen. The daily comms one call, I would say, is a similar tool. Again, it's not something that's necessarily documented, but it's a really useful way of you as a team and HQ saying, is this deployment going in the way that we think it should be going and we plan to do it? And then the final one is the post-deployment monitoring report or handover report. It's got multiple uses, this, but in a monitoring sense, it's very useful for teams coming in to have a record of what's been done, what's planned, what perhaps could be done better. It's that written record that should be a very useful template for teams coming in. It's then got subsequent use. I use it as an evaluation tool, allowing me to understand what happens in different phases of a deployment. So that is the early monitoring systems, monitoring of inputs, activities, and outputs. So I hope that kind of all comes across fairly clearly. As I said, the next phase of monitoring is about monitoring that you do after a distribution. So you've just distributed some aid. Really, we need to see if that aid is doing what you'd expected it to do. Are we starting to achieve some of those outcomes? And when I talk about outcomes, I'm referring to the short to medium term outcomes on the theory of change. So using a simple example, if we'd said that we were looking to protect people from extreme cold, which we are in some situations, by going back out to sites, I'll come to your question in a minute, actually, if that's okay. But by going back out to sites, we can see if the aid that we've given people or the way that they're using the aid is actually providing the protection that we're hoping it will. So it's about starting to just double check. I always refer to it as a sense check. It's sense checking to see if we're achieving what we thought we'd achieve. Now, the post-distribution monitoring, which I think, unless there's extenuating circumstances, is something that should happen after pretty much every distribution, particularly early distributions, especially if you're working through implementing partners, because often it's an opportunity to make sure that the way they're doing things is right, that they're selecting the right beneficiaries or they're providing the appropriate level of training. And it's really something that needs to be driven by you as a team in the field. So you need to be planning it into your distribution methodology and making sure that it's happened. It essentially asks, is our response appropriate and relevant? So I've got the 3 Ps here. Those who will have seen my hilarious lecture at the last 9 day will recognise that the 3 Ps refer to people. So have we selected the right beneficiaries, or are there any gaps in the distributions? Is the product the right product? Is there any problems with the product that we need to know about? Is there anything that perhaps we should be providing that we're not providing? And then the final one is the process. Is the process that we're using to distribute the aid the right one? Is it efficient? Is it accountable to the beneficiary? So they're the sort of the 3 main themes. Now, the the post-distribution monitoring should draw from a range of approaches. There's no set template that I would expect you to use. I think you as a team need to work out what's right depending on how much time you've got, what resources you've got available, perhaps the geography. But there's some just suggested approaches here. You might go for formal surveys. Perhaps you might want to go for interviews. Another approach is actually just to speak to people. So if you're limited by time, or perhaps geography is a limiting factor, it might just be important just to chat to a few people and see what they think. And never underestimate the value of observations. So there's 4 suggested approaches. But as I said, this, I think, is something that really needs to be driven by you as a response team member. It's your way of ensuring that when you've done a distribution, it has achieved what you, or it is looking like it is going to achieve what you want it to achieve. And then anything that comes out in the way of results should feed back into that current response. So when I said that post-distribution monitoring is especially pertinent in the early phases of response, it's because the information that comes out of it should then feed into subsequent distributions. And I think that those of you that were involved in Haiti this year, or 2016, will recognise that there were some really useful insights that came out of early post-distribution monitoring. Okay, now we're just going into evaluations. So this is, as Mark said, we've now got an M&E team of 4, and really they're going to be, it's not just about me anymore, as Mark's whispering in my ear. They're really going to be driving this evaluation process. But I just want to make sure that you are aware of what that evaluation process is. And I do encourage you, if you have an interest, and some of you have expressed an interest, that this is something that you can be involved in as well. I think those of you who have done evaluations will recognise that seeing things and the consequences of decisions made does affect how you then react when you're out in the field on the next deployment. So what we do in terms of evaluation is we do a +1 month evaluation. So around 1 month after distributions occur, we go back out, we do a formalised survey, and we're looking to see what the outcome of our distribution is. So these refer to the short to medium term outcomes on the theory of change, and I've just listed them here. I'm not going to go over them in detail, but these essentially are the things that we think we achieve through the distribution of shelter and non-food items. It's the change in state or change in behaviour that we hope will happen as a result of what we're doing. And as an organisation, we feel that these are really the foundations of self-recovery, that by achieving these things for the beneficiary, this then puts them in a really good place to start moving on that self-recovery process. So I use these as the template for any 1 month after evaluation. I'm going to very quickly talk about how we do that. So for the keen of eye among you, some of the terms that we use in terms of those outcomes are a little bit ambiguous. So for example, what do we mean by stress and anxiety? What actually does that mean? So what we did is the few of us got together and we took these short-term outcomes and we tried to add some substance to them. So I've given you an example here. We've got one which is reduced household displacement. And we asked a little bit about what do we mean by that. And we came up with the conclusion it wasn't just about making sure households are on their home sites where possible, or trying to support people getting back to their home sites. But also it was about households being able to continue with those normal family having access to some of their livelihood facilities. So, for example, those of you who were involved in the Sri Lanka deployment last year will remember that actually people weren't able to move back to their home sites because they were considered unsafe. But actually what we did as an organisation is made sure that the sites that were selected did still give them access to some of those normal livelihood activities. And then using those kind of indicators, I've then developed some survey questions so that when I go out and undertake surveys, or when a response team go out and undertake surveys, these survey questions relate directly back to that short-term outcome. I'm doing a bit of work at the moment to work on that because it is a process in development, but hopefully you can see that all our evaluations do relate back to these short to medium-term outcomes. They're what we consider to be success. Now, At the end of that, I produce an evaluation report, which is circulated internally. It's quite lengthy, and I would suggest that not that many people have the time to read it. So then what I do is I condense it down to a summary report, which is normally 2 to 3 pages, and that pulls out the pertinent details. Those summary reports, the newsletters should draw your attention to where they are. They're all on the portal. So keep an eye on the newsletter to see where they are. So far, we've done them for Ecuador, Sri Lanka, Haiti, and a project in Syria. And on that, I provide some sort of indication of how we've done in terms of those short to medium term outcomes. So we quantify it and then show you the results of that. And this graph is a demonstration of that. Now, I would urge you not to get fixed up on the numbers. It's really looking about, for us, it's about looking at where we've done well, where we've done badly, and if we've perceived to have done badly, we then ask the question as to why we've done that. And sometimes it can be due to survey error, speaking frankly, and other times it might be because actually we've perhaps not done something that we can do, and then it helps us to learn for future responses. Also on those summaries, you'll see that deployments are now provided with a value for money figure. And basically this looks at a deployment in terms of the cost per household, the timeliness of the deployment, and the quality of the deployment. And these are 3 useful metrics. And I basically produce a score out of 10. The quality score is taken from those short to medium term outcomes and just allows us to get some indication of how high quality the distribution was. And what this means is we might have a deployment, for example, that's incredibly timely, really swift, but we've done everything really badly. It's very low quality. Or conversely, it can be a very expensive deployment, but very high quality. So sometimes you have to weigh that up. Now, again, looking at these value for money graphs on the summaries, as I hope you will do, I'd urge you not to get caught up in the figures. It's not about comparing across deployments. It's just about looking at perhaps where we might not have done so well. So if it is expensive, asking the question, why was it expensive? What can we learn from that? Yeah, that's really what it's about. So it's not about comparing Haiti to Syria, because I don't think that's possible. The second phase of the evaluation process is one that many of you will have been involved in. It's a post-deployment wash-up. I'm now doing these for most normal multi-team deployments. Some of the more complex deployments associated with protracted crises, I'm not. But your standard rapid onset deployment, we're doing these. So they should take place after every single deployment. It's a webinar, so it's very similar to this, and it's just a forum for those that were involved in the response, be them staff or volunteers, to discuss it. And it's really about you as a team self-identifying where you did well and where you did badly. It's something that I'm sure you're very familiar with, having been involved in the training process that Mark and his team run, which is often about kind of debriefing it. So it basically follows on from that. And for me, it's all about us as an organisation becoming, developing a learning culture and developing a culture where we're happy to be critical of our own behaviour. I'm going to be reviewing the deployment wash-up at the end of the year just to see if there's value in it, both internally in terms of what we're getting out of it, and also for you. I hope it's useful for you, but I don't want to assume. And I'm aware that there's already several requirements on your time as response team members in terms of these webinars and debriefs after deployment. So I don't want to be placing undue stress on you, but I will be reviewing that in 2018. So get involved in them and consider if it's useful for you. And then the final evaluation is the 6-month evaluation. This will probably be occurring about twice a year. I haven't done any of these yet. They follow a little bit more the old style of M&E at Shelterbox, but I sort of wanted to move away from that a little bit. But I think there is a value in going back to it. But they're quite big projects to put together. So they're not going to occur for every deployment. And the point of these, just to be clear, we, as I've said before, as an organisation, believe that by achieving the short to medium term outcomes for an affected community, this then puts them in a good place to start recovering. But that's an assumption on our part. So the point of this is really to test that assumption. Is that true that when we've left, people do start self-recovering? Or are we going to find that when we go back 6 months later, people are just in the same position? So it's just about double checking that. but also it's an opportunity to test any new aid items that we've got, or perhaps any new processes. So as you hear talk of various things such as local procurement, maybe even cash, the 6-month evaluation will be seen as a real opportunity to dig into that. But that's something that we'll be working on in 2018. Okay, so that's the evaluation. As I said, it's three stages. Finally, and I would argue the most important part of any meal framework, is the communication and change. And those of you will know that MEAL is monitoring, evaluation, accountability and learning. And this part really is about the accountability and learning. It's about accounting to our donors and saying where their money has gone, what impact that money has had, how has it changed people's their lives really. And it's also about taking that information internally and saying what can we learn from that. So we now have a change management board. And basically every recommendation that's made through the evaluations are taken to that change management board. The process is very simple. The board, which consists of Nikki, Darren, Alf, and then myself and Colin. Colin is the representative of training and me as the person that's bringing the recommendations forward. We're also involved. But that board look at each recommendation and decide whether they're going to accept or reject it. And that's quite simply because sometimes there can be a fault within a deployment, but it might just be one of those things that's happened. It might not need any big organizational change. Once they've accepted or rejected it, they'll identify an action. So some recommendations only require very simple changes, which will be done straight away. Others involve longer term projects. So for example, suggestions have been made that we should locally procure. That is a fairly big piece of work. We now have a project list, which is split between the operations team. So any new additions to that project list are prioritised, just to see where they fit within that sort of competing list. They're then resourced appropriately, so deciding if it's a job for procurement or a job for logistics or a job for training. And once it's resourced, the progress is tracked by that change management board. And then the final stage is to communicate any changes to the operations team, to the response team, to logistics, and anyone else that might have a vested interest in that. So that's the communication and change element. As I said, evaluations are also written up into a report, which is shared internally. And then I'm just going to reiterate the point that there is summary documents, which are for your own viewing. So hopefully, when you're involved in a deployment, you'll also see the results of that, because I think sometimes, particularly if you're involved in the early or middle phase of deployment, you never really know what happens except for a bit of hearsay. So the idea is to present that information back to you. Okay. I'm just going to very quickly just make sure that we covered everything. So we looked at the theory of change very quickly. If you are unfamiliar with it, there is a theory of change webinar. We then very quickly looked at needs assessments. If you're unfamiliar with it, there is a needs assessment webinar. We then looked at monitoring inputs, activities and outputs, and also post-distribution monitoring. If you're unfamiliar with it, there is a monitoring in emergencies webinar. And then I just briefly discussed our evaluation process, which is to do it 1 month after, to have a wash up, which anyone involved in the response is invited to. And then we'll be looking to do a 6-month wash up. And then finally, just showing you where that information went. So that was that. Now I invite you just for 10 minutes to ask any questions. If you've got any questions, if you could just type them into the chat bar, just type hand and then we'll come to you. I'll go back to Garn's question while you're all having a think. And Garn has asked, how do you distinguish between outcomes and outputs? So an output is essentially the delivery of a tent. We have given someone a tent. In Haiti 2010, our output was 27,000 tents over the period of our intervention. But we don't know what we achieved with those tents in that given situation. So the outcome is what happens as a result of the aid that we've given. I hope that answers the question. So it's more about a behavioural change or a change in state. And that's really what we've been doing a lot of work on back here, is to try and understand a little bit more about what we're trying to achieve through the distribution of that shelter. And I think the classic example of that might be, and this is a simplification, but some suggest that the tent isn't recovery focused. But by giving someone a shelter kit, the outcome of that is it might encourage them to rebuild or to repair a property. I hope that answers that question. If anyone else has got any other questions, please don't hesitate to tap it in. We'll just give you a couple of minutes to have a think. If there's no questions. Oh, Mark Stevenson. Yes, Mark.
Yeah, just a quick one, Malcolm. Good evening. It's just about your post-monitoring framework, with the results and the value for money.
Yeah.
Will you make that available to the teams that went out with, perhaps a little bit of a write-up as to what that actually meant, so that we can, we were there, take Mozambique, for instance, the initial 2 weeks that we're there, we can see the end result for it, and we can also learn from what we actually identified as being the outcomes as well. It'd be really useful to know what we were thinking at the time, how it transpired, and what we identified as good learning.
So I would hope the summary documents, there hasn't been one for Mozambique yet. I've got a Peru one, which I'm going to do first, and then I'll move on to the Mozambique one. There will be the summary document, which will include a breakdown of what we achieved in terms of those outcomes, and it will also include value for money out of 10. I don't go into specifics purely because I think, especially when you're talking financials, it's very easy to look at the cost of some deployments, and I'm not talking about the response team necessarily, but once this thing is out, it's out in the public domain, and some people might latch onto certain costs. So it's above my pay grade to make that decision. So I basically standardise the results of that, so it's just a simple score out of 10. So you can certainly see where the expensive deployments were, and see where the cheaper ones were, and hopefully review that compared to the quality element and also the timeliness element. If there's any interesting features in it, so for example, Sri Lanka was very expensive, and I think I discussed that a little bit in the summary document, talking about why it was so expensive. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, so Derek's just asked, will these summaries be available on the portal? They are already. Elaine, in her newsletters, includes, when I've produced a summary, she then includes details of where that summary is kept on the portal. I forget the file path off the top of my head, but it's something like documents, and then, yeah, you have to go exploring from there. But basically, on the portal, you will find that there is a summary for Ecuador, a summary for Sri Lanka last year. There is a summary for Haiti for 2016, and also for a project we did in Syria. And these will increase in number. So as soon as those are put out, the details of that are in the next newsletter. Hope that answers your question, Mr. Locke.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Boat's got a question next to me.
Yeah, I've got a question, Mark. In terms of the wash-ups,
Yeah.
you said that we're only doing wash-ups for natural disasters and not some of the protracted deployments that we're on. Is the question is there value in looking at deployments like Syria, like Cameroon, and some of those other Central African states, for some learning as to, are we doing it right? Is there anything better, or should we not be there?
Yeah. So Mark's just asked. I've spoken about the wash-ups and the fact that at the moment I'm only really doing them for your standard shelter box deployment, and that's essentially a capacity issue. But what he asked is there wisdom in doing that on some of the more complex, protracted crises, such as Syria, such as Chad Basin, and the work we're doing in Chad and also Cameroon? And yes, there is, and that's really part of the reason why we've upscaled the M&E capacity. Is just one of the aims is that Syria and some of those protracted crises will be dealt with as systematically and in the same way that we do our standard deployments. And that goes for wash-ups as well, because there's often 3 or 4 response operations teams that are involved in it. It's very common for response team volunteers to deploy as part of the projects, as part of the trips out to Turkey or out to Cameroon. And therefore, I think there is value in it. So each of the protracted crises will have an M&E coordinator who is attached to it, and we'll look at what is the M&E strategy in that given deployment. Because everything I've discussed today is just a framework, it's just a template to work to, but the specifics of it have to be adapted to the particular context. So any surveys we develop have to fit the context that we're working in. There's no good just having a generic template. So this will all be scaled up over, hopefully, all of our operations over the next 12 months. Does that answer your question, Mark?
It does indeed. Thank you.
If you do have any other questions, I'm more than happy to talk this through, because I am aware that this was a kind of a whistle-stop tour through it, and I did that on purpose just because I really wanted to show and make sure everyone understood the different phases. And I've had some people asking, so for example, someone came back from Haiti and said, we did post-distribution monitoring. It was really useful, but why aren't HQ pushing us to do it? Because we just did it off our own back. And for me, I was thinking, well, I thought we were pushing it. And sometimes there can be a bit of a breakdown and people don't understand the different elements of M&E, especially as it's evolving. So I just wanted to make sure that you all understood, I guess, the different phases and where your responsibilities come in. And there's always support from us. So if you're on a deployment and you're looking to do some post-distribution monitoring and you're not quite sure how to go about it, don't hesitate to email me, and I can certainly provide some guidance. But essentially, then you as a team have to take the impetus and do it. And it's the same with monitoring inputs. For example, if you're struggling with the distribution tracker, speak to a logistician about it, because they will be able to help you through it. It's just important that you understand these things. Well, I believe I've either covered everything so succinctly. Oh, hold up. Okay, so I've either covered everything so beautifully that you've got no questions, or you're also bamboozled that you can't even think what to ask. Just draw your attention to Ishan's comment in the chat bar, that they also publish the monthly minutes from the forum, and they're also available on the portal. It's a good job that the portal's so easy to navigate around, because then these things are really easy to find. Anyway, that's it from me. I'll hand over to Mark to close.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm. Another interesting webinar, and hopefully you've found that to be the same. Just going to make sure that we can point you in the direction of the old SurveyMonkey and the knowledge check. I'll see if I can actually copy this into, no, there it goes, it's gone. Here we go, I can do it this way. So yeah, please don't forget to cover these when you're there. I'll copy the link into the old chat bar, hopefully. It's not going to go in. Try a different way. No. Copy. It's not liking that. It's playing up this evening. Anybody smart enough to get that down and put it in, be much appreciated. If you don't get it in before we close this down, don't forget that this will be posted up on the portal, but more than that, we'll actually put it up onto Shelterbox's training team's YouTube site. So we'll probably post it up tomorrow, and we'll also make sure that the link is posted up on YouTube as well. Have a look at that. Send us any comments. There it is. There's lots of people have put that up, so thank you very much indeed for all of that. If there's no more questions, myself and Malcolm will say good night to a very wet Cornwall in the summer. Some of you are probably enjoying better weather elsewhere around the world. Thank you to everyone. It's much appreciated that you give your time to us to make it worthwhile. So I'm going to close. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Bye now.
Thanks, Dave.